Hello, welcome. This is chapter 3, part 1 video. We're going to split it into two parts. This first part's going to be about questions and different types and styles of questions. And then we are going to do part 2 over question pitfalls more specifically. So that'll give us about the first 20 slides or so in this part 1. And then the second half, the last 13 or so, on the second. So let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, we are in chapter 3. So questions and their uses. So we have two main types of questions, open and closed. Most questions can fit into those two categories. If they're open, they're either highly open, which no restrictions really on how the interviewee can answer. They can be more moderately open, but still the interviewee, the person answering, still has a lot of freedom with their answer. So it's not just a yes or no question. There might not be one right answer. So they get to determine how much information they give. So some examples of open questions is, tell me about your trip to Spain. Tell me about your relationship with your parents. How do you feel about X, Y, Z? Can you tell me what something signifies? What is significant about insert thing here? So all of those questions, there's multiple ways that they can be answered. Like I said, it's not just yes or no. There is not one specific right answer. Some of the advantages and disadvantages, if you have someone who really has a lot of information that you need, then open questions are good because it encourages them to talk so you can get all of the information that you need. And the interviewee determines the type and amount of information to disclose, so they might be more comfortable with some of these. But then again, that'll be dependent on their individual personality as well. But they can take a lot of time. So if you're on a time crunch, you're not going to be asking a whole bunch of open questions just because some of them can be very lengthy, especially if you have someone who just really likes to talk. And sometimes people have a hard time getting to the meat of it, getting straight to the point. So they might give you unimportant information that's irrelevant, doesn't really fit in the context, or they might withhold important information, but that's something you always have to kind of be thinking about in any communication interaction anyways. Okay. And then you have closed questions. So they're very, very focused. You can have moderately closed, which are just specific limited pieces of information. So I'm trying to think of a really good example for this. Tell me about, well, actually, no, that'd be more open if you're asking someone to tell you about, but I guess a better example would be the highly closed. So how old are you? That's a single piece of information. Where are you from? Highly closed, there's one piece of information from that. I mean, I guess that could be moderately closed because some people might have multiple places where they're from, and they could say, well, I'm from, here, here, and here. And then bipolar questions, which is very closed because it's limited to just two. And sometimes bipolar can be a question pitfall if it's unintentional. If it's intentional, then it's just a closed questions. But if you're not meaning to ask a bipolar question, then it's a pitfall. So a bipolar question would be, do you prefer dogs or cats? That is two polar or two quote unquote opposite choices. So did you enjoy the game? That's a yes or no. Are you enrolled in a college? That's a yes or no, but that could even be moderately closed because, yes, I'm enrolled at EAC or NAU or insert whatever here. Some of the advantages of it gives the interviewer a lot of control. So with open questions, the interviewee has a lot of control, but on this one, we're giving the control back to the interviewer. And they can get extremely specific information that they might need for data. They don't require as much effort, these closed questions. So, and you can get more information in less time, or at least ask more questions in a shorter amount of time. Because, closed questions can typically be asked and answered, couple seconds. Where are you from? Kansas. How old are you? Insert age here. Do you prefer cats or dogs? Whatever. Those go by pretty quickly. But open questions you might have to spend more time thinking about. And brief answers like you'd get in closed questions, they're really easy to put into data. They're easy to record and tabulate. But you might not get all of the information you need. So you might have to ask lots of follow-up questions. When you have these short closed questions, the interviewers tend to talk more than the interviewees, and typically we want to get as much information out of the interviewee as possible, so we want them to be doing, the most amount of talking rather than us, or rather than the interviewer. And on a whole, typically you get less rich information because it's limited to these certain little snack bites of information rather than a whole narrative or a whole story, which for sometimes that can be really good, but sometimes you want more of the open-ended answers. So here is a little table if you're more of a visual learner about some of the advantages and disadvantages. So as you can see, for these highly open questions, you have the potential for a lot of breadth and depth of information, but you don't for these highly closed. So interviewers' control is really low in these highly open questions. So a little bit higher if it's moderately, higher and higher going on to highly closed. Reliability, typically for your highly closed questions, they're very, very easy to replicate, and therefore they are very reliable. These highly closed questions are good for time if you're short on time, but they're not very good for providing the opportunity to talk about feelings and potentially controversial information. For that, you'd want open questions. So some examples. So highly open would be, tell me about Brazil, for an example, because that leaves the option open to say anything about Brazil. So moderately open would be slightly more specific. So we're not just saying anything you know about Brazil. We'd say, okay, well, tell me about your mission that you did in Brazil, or the work that you did. Moderately closed, so what are your favorite classes? That's moderately closed because it's asking specifically from a list of your classes, which ones are your favorite. Highly closed, where were you born? Because there's only one right answer for that. You were only born one place, you weren't born twice. And then bipolar closed would be, are you a conservative or a liberal? Do you like cats or dogs? Because there are two choices and only two. I feel like every time I come sit in the library, I just immediately start yawning, unfortunately. Our next type of questions are primary and probing. So we can have, primary open questions, primary closed questions, and then we can follow that up with a probing question if we didn't quite get the information we were looking for. So these primary questions are the introduction to this topic, and even if they're taken out of context, they can still stand alone. So tell me about your experience in wrestling. That might be a primary question. It might be a new area within the context of our interaction, but that stands on its own. It may not be personally relevant to every single person, but it would stand on its own. Probing questions can't stand on their own because they come after, a different question. So that would be like, can you clarify what you meant in regards to placing at state? So without the context there of like, well, what sport are we doing? What year was this? What's going on? It doesn't really make sense. But if I'd asked about someone's experience wrestling in high school and they said, yeah, we placed in state, I could say, can you clarify what you mean by placing in state? And like, yeah, we took second or we took first. So it only makes sense when connected with the previous context. You use probing questions when you want additional information. Maybe someone wasn't quite clear in their explanation, or it's just you need to dig deeper to get down to what the actual issue is. Sorry, geez, like I said, I get in the library and then I just start yawning. You can have like verbal probes, so spoken probes, or you can have silent probes. We tend to do a lot of these kind of unconsciously. So someone's telling us a story and maybe they like trail off or whatever, get distracted, we might give them a look or make contact with their eyes again to continue, to encourage them to continue. If someone thinks we might be uncomfortable with the topic matter, they might trail off and kind of give us a look, and then we might be like, yeah, I don't want to know anymore. Or we'd say, yeah, keep going, kind of nod our head. If you've ever been in a group where someone really, really talks a lot and someone else is trying to get a word in because they have something to say, you might make eye contact with the person trying to speak and nod a bit to be like, yeah, I'm hearing you, like I'm recognizing that it's your turn to speak. Or you might try to make eye contact with the person who just keeps talking and be like, hey, so-and-so has been trying to talk, it's their turn. And then of course, silence, if we're not trying to talk over people, then we are showing interest in what's going on and being an encouragement to them and bettering the communication interaction. Nudging probe, these can be spoken. They can just be the noise like, mm-hmm. Or it could be something just as simple as, and, or, oh, go on, da-da-da-da-da. So if someone isn't responding to the nonverbal probe, you might have to move to this one. Maybe it's as simple as like clearing your throat and giving your friend who's talking too much a very pointed look. To nudge them in the right direction of like, John has something to say. And then clearing house. So these are typically the questions you'd ask at the very end of an interview. So is there anything that you'd like to add? Is there anything I have forgotten to ask you about that you would think is important? But basically it's just, is there anything that we have not talked about that you would like to? And this just gives the people a chance to say, yeah, this thing popped in my mind when we were talking, or, you never asked me about this, but I think it's important. And it gives them a chance to volunteer that information without having to be probed for it. So it makes it a little easier on you and leaves you both with a good feeling of, yes, we've gotten everything out in the air that we need to get out and talk about. Sorry, seriously, guys, I'm so sorry that I just keep yawning. More types, so informational. So if we want more explanation, so you'd say, can you clarify that? What do you mean by XYZ? You can restate things if you're not quite sure to get clarification. and say something like, so from what I understand, insert restatement here, is that correct? And they'd either be like, yes, that's perfect, that's exactly what I meant, or they might be like, no, like, I mean it this way. But that makes sure you get all your information correct. That can also help when you're just, in general conversation with people, if you're not quite sure of what they're saying. Just be like, hey, so what I'm understanding is this. And that kind of goes with the reflective thing too. The restatement and reflective are kind of, two sides of the same coin. So you're just making sure the information you have is correct and complete. And then mirror. So you are summarizing to ensure that you know what's going on. So you could say, so to summarize our interaction, bam, bam, bam. So our 3 main points are whatever we talked about. And that's your chance, once again, to clarify and ensure accuracy. So to make sure all the information you have is correct information. So you could even do this at the end of a job interview. You could do any of these. So, from what I understand, the job position entails this, this, and this. Yes, you're correct, or no, this is what it means. Okay, so what do you mean by, clerical work? Well, this is what we mean here at this company by clerical work, or da-da-da-da-da. And then how to use it skillfully. So, if you don't have all the information you need to use probing questions. We're not saying you need to go out and try to hammer them over the head and get all of their secrets. No, definitely not. But just how can you encourage people to keep talking if you need more information? You can do it with silence. You can do it with head nods. You can do it with just kind of those vocalizations that aren't really words, like stuff like that, where you can just say, okay, go on. What else? Be patient. So not everyone is a fast talker or a fast thinker. Some people really like to make sure they have their thoughts in order before they say anything. So don't try to push them to answer before they're ready. Listen carefully. So you can take notes if you need to, record the interview if you have permission. Technically, though, Arizona is a single party recording state, so you don't actually have to have permission, but it's still a good idea. Make sure that you know what they're saying, and if not, ask for clarifications. Just, be a good listener, be a good participant and partner in this communication interaction. So what kind of probing questions would we use here? So if we're asking our friend, okay, how was the concert? And they just say, oh, it was awesome. Okay. Are we going to use a silent probe? Are we going to use a nudging probe? Like what? Depending on our friend, we might just look at them and kind of just raise our eyebrow or just kind of make a noise, and then they'll just keep talking. Yeah. So from what I understand, you think the zombie apocalypse will soon be upon us. Well, that's partially true. What do you mean by partially? Why is it only partially true? Why'd you decide to major in chemistry? Oh, because I like it. What do you like about chemistry? Just stuff like that. So probing questions, those follow-up questions. So, our next type of question, our next little subset is neutral versus leading. So neutral questions, most of the time the questions we ask are pretty neutral because we're not trying to give people a specific way that we want them to answer. We're not leading them or directing them to a specific answer. We're just saying, how do you feel about this? Or what's your opinion on X, Y, Z? What do you do for work? So on and so forth. They have kind of free range to pick their answer without feeling like we're expecting a specific one. Leading questions, however, are very much you know, intentionally or even unintentionally directing people to specific answers. You know, we do naturally or kind of unthinkingly ask leading questions because it's just part of our speech pattern. I think we know what we want people to say, so sometimes unintentionally we just ask questions in the way that might encourage them to answer in that specific way. And you know, some of that does come through in bias because we all have bias whether we admit to it or not. But it leads us to ask questions in certain ways. But if our bias is readily apparent, it might also make people answer in certain ways that they think would make us happy or pleased. And then loaded questions are even worse because they're a very extreme form of leading question, which there is really only one quote unquote right answer or even no right answer, or you're trying to entrap people into a certain question. Let me see where our, okay. So it looks like I don't have my examples on the slides, but a leading question might be like, are you like the rest of the A students who, you know, support this specific thing that the school has proposed? So it's saying, you know, well, if you're an A student, you support this. If you're not an A student, then you don't support it. And then like a loaded question would be like, are you still cheating on your tests? Are you still beating your spouse? Those are all very, very leading and loaded because if you say, well, no, they're like, okay, so you're admitting to cheating in the past on tests or you're admitting to previously beating your spouse. There's not a right answer for that one. So here's some more examples of that. So primary, neutral, primary, leading, open, close, just so you can see how all of these things can interact. Feel free to pause and take a look about some of this. And there is the end of our first part of this. So we'll go on to part 2 after you take a break, get a drink of water, and do what needs to be done. So we'll see you here in a couple minutes. Thanks.